Hi, this is Adam Biek from A.J.B Counseling and Psychotherapy, and today we're going to talk about stress management. Powerful tips and tricks that you haven't heard yet, hopefully. The idea of this is I wanted to collect things that are useful, that can be applied almost immediately, if not immediately, to help you manage your stress better, whether that's at work, at home, or wherever. And my hope was that, when I was looking through uh, different stress management tool sets, it's a lot of the same stuff: breathing techniques, meditations, go for a walk, stuff like that. It's just kind of almost cliche. So I wanted to give you guys something more meaty. So here we go. What we're going to cover in this presentation is first we're going to talk about the most important things, the basic stuff that everyone should be doing. The first one is going to be emulating our natural environment. We'll unpack that uh, in the next slide. We'll start unpacking it. Second, we're going to talk about resistances to experience. So, everybody has certain kinds of resistance to certain kinds of experiences. Some people are more tolerant of anger, some people are more tolerant of anxiety, other people are more tolerant of sadness, as examples. As a result, we end up developing something called signal anxiety or signal tension or both. And what we're going to do is we're going to go over a technique. First, I'll give you a generic demonstration of this technique on how to overcome these resistances. See, these resistances most often lead to increased stress. And we're going to do a demonstration, a generic demonstration. Then we're going to get more specific. We're going to show you how to apply it for tension headaches. And then we'll go over another application, another example of an application for chest tightness, that phenomenon where you feel like you can't take a full breath. These are the most common signal tensions that I see. So I chose those. Next, we'll talk about dealing with stress versus coping with stress. There's a difference. One way to define stress is to say that it is the awareness of risk minus preparation for that risk. We'll unpack that and we'll get into that a little later. Then I'll give you some constant worry tips. So tips for individuals who are constantly worried about this, about that. They're at work, they're worried about stuff at work. When they go home, they're still worried about stuff at work, or maybe even something else. So I got 3 tips for you there. And then finally, we'll end it by talking about insomnia and how you can apply a very simple concept of paradoxical intent to increase your quality of sleep. Paradoxical intent is effective in one form or another for majority individuals. It improves quality of sleep for majority of individuals. So that's how we'll end it. So let's get into it. Let's get into emulating our natural environment. How did cavemen and women deal with stress? It was all physical. Back back in the day, back in the day that none of us remember because no one was alive back then. I'm talking about the time during which humanity really evolved. Um, Stressors were physical in nature. They were the tiger that showed up at your doorstep. They were the opposing clansmen or something that showed up in your cave and tried to beat you to death for your resources. Those were physical stresses. And the way we dealt with those is by physically responding. We either ran away or we fought. And that required physical exertion. Today, that's not the case. How do we deal with it today? We don't. We don't deal with stressors in the same way because the demands and the way the stresses show up in our life today are more in line with, they're more like imaginary. They're real. The stresses are real. That's not what I'm trying to say. That I'm not trying to say that they are not real, but they are almost like imagining a tiger. There is no actual tiger to fight. There's nothing to run away from or to fight physically. It's all, for the most part, for many of us, it's cognitive in nature. And so we don't have the same kind of resolution to our stressors. Here's an example of a stressor back in the day. A bear shows up, right? What happens? You have your stress response, which is upregulation. It jacks up your whole body, gets you ready for either fighting or running away, right? So adrenaline and stuff like that. And then stress response resolution. What's the resolution? You run away. The act of running away fulfills a bodily need. Your body expects that this is what's going to happen. Because back in the day, those were only two options: fight or flee, fight or run away. So your body expects this. However, so okay, so before I get into the however, this is the full cycle. So you have the stressor, the bear, then you got the stress response, which is, you upregulating everything, adrenaline starts pumping, you freak out, and then, or you get angry. Anger is also another form of a stress response. And then you have stress response resolution, fighting or running away. In this case, well, they say don't run away from bears, right? So maybe not the perfect example, but I think you get the point, right? But then again, who would you really curl up into a ball and play dead if a bear's about to maul you? I don't know. I think I'd take my chance with running, but that's besides the point. But let's talk about today's cycle. What does it look like? Well, the stressor today is a computer screen most often, right? Deadline due tomorrow, bill overdue, angry boss, angry customers. What does that lead to? Your stress response. Same response as with the bear. You get jacked up, you got adrenaline pumping. But where's the stress response resolution? You're still there. Maybe at most you're biting at that pencil, and maybe that's giving you a little bit of a resolution. Maybe it's satisfying your body's need a little bit, just a little bit, but not really enough. So what's the conclusion? We have to exercise. We have to exercise in order to emulate our natural stress response and resolution cycle. The resolution part is what we're missing. Let me go back one slide. See, the resolution part. We're missing that. If we're desk jockeys, right? We're sitting at a desk all day and we're working from the computer, there is nowhere to run, there's no need for that. So we don't do it. We just sit there and stew in our own adrenaline. Basically, that's what we're doing. We're just sitting there and stewing in our own chemicals, our own stress response chemicals. There's no end to it, really. There's no natural or expected end to it, the way our bodies expect for it to be resolved. So this was well studied by researchers, and they found that cardio is king. And it makes sense. Think about it. Think about top boxers, or any boxer, but really top boxers, top MMA fighters. Sure, sometimes they're jacked, but rarely. They're usually very lean, right? But they got endurance for days. Cardio is number one. Cardio is probably the biggest predictor of survival, or has been the biggest predictor of survival back in the day. If you get good cardio, you can fight longer. Fights don't often end like in movies right away. They drag out a lot of times, and the first person to start getting tired is going to likely lose. Same thing with running away. If you're running away, if you run out of endurance, you're going to get eaten or hunted down. So cardio is really the main solution that we were engineered or evolved to utilize as a stress response resolution. They found that cardio in a heart rate range of 70 to 85% of your max is most effective. That's considered intense or vigorous cardio. By the way, in case you're curious, your heart rate maximum is 220 minus your age. That's a very simple formula to approximate your heart rate max. So if you want to get your 70 to 85% range, just multiply your max by 0.7 and by 0.85, and you'll get your range. Now, the optimal amount of exercise is 150 minutes per week. That's the recommended amount. In most of the studies done on stress and anxiety, the most that they had their participants exercising per week was, I believe, 120 minutes. So you don't even need to reach the max or the recommended amount to gain benefits. Now, it's immediately beneficial for acute stress. So if you're going through stress right now, you're feeling really wired and really stressed out and uncomfortable, if you do intense cardio right now, within, let's say, 20 minutes of doing intense cardio, you will feel a lot better. So this is an immediate solution for stress. So I can tell you something that I used to do back when I was working a really stressful job. Sometimes I would go on my lunch breaks, I would run to the gym because something happens talking with a customer or talking with somebody who the company that's contracting us, which was just um, I would take a break. I would run to the gym, bang it out at the gym, and I would feel better. It was a night and day difference. So I really recommend this. Now, trait anxiety. Researchers have found that trait anxiety begins to be reduced on a statistically significant level. So on average, right, at 10 weeks and peaks at 16 weeks or longer. What's trait anxiety? Trait anxiety is most synonymous with generalized anxiety disorder. So generalized anxiety disorder is when you're worried about everything. It's general worry. So trait anxiety is a term used to describe the tendency to become anxious about something. So, in other words, the tendency to become anxious about stuff in general begins to decline in a significant when measured, right? When measured by large sample sizes, begins to decline at 10 weeks and peaks. It gives you the biggest decrease in anxiety after 16 weeks. Here's a nice little graph. Everybody loves graphs, so I threw in this graph. It's from one of the studies that looked at the effect of exercise on anxiety. And here we see, in the beginning, 4 to 6 weeks, not much change. 7 to 9, not much change. 10, boom, suddenly a larger change. 13 to 15, that's interesting. I'm not sure why it dropped. But then we see a much larger change after about 16 weeks. So, okay, so now let's move on to the second thing. Now let's talk about resistance to experience. Resistance to experience, so I think I introduced this concept earlier. We all have a preference. Let's talk about this in terms of preferences. We all have a preference for one type of emotion over the other. We feel more comfortable with either anger or sadness or anxiety over others, right? So commonly we might hear there are some statements that go around in our society that support this. So for example, boys don't cry, right? So boys are not allowed to feel sad. Or it used to be, and I don't know if that's still the case, but it used to be it's unladylike to express anger, right? So uh, as a rule of thumb, men tend to struggle with sadness, women tend to struggle with anger, but it seems to be, at least in my experience, that across the board, people in general tend to struggle with anger the most. And when it comes to work situations, anger seems to be most often the feeling that people resist most often. So when we resist feelings, on a first level, we can begin to experience something called signal anxiety. What's signal anxiety? So imagine that you absolutely find anger inappropriate. I'm going to use anger as an example because from my experience, that's the most common underlying emotion. If you find anger to be absolutely unacceptable, let's say your boss makes you angry, then you will try to suppress it. When it comes up for you that anger is a threat, right? For a lot of people, anger represents this potential to explode at your boss. This potential, like anger is dangerous. We're taught that anger is dangerous. And when you feel it coming up for you, you will try to fight it because that's a sign of a threat. Now, what's another feeling that we experience when we perceive a threat? Fear, right? What's fear? Fear is anxiety. So signal anxiety. So when anger comes up for you, a lot of times, a lot of people will experience anxiety as opposed to anger. So here is one new potential avenue to cut down on your stress. But before I get into that, I mean, well, yeah. Before I get into that, let me just finish the whole. Let me tackle the signal tension. So signal tension, it's like the next level of signal anxiety. So if you've been having signal anxiety for a while, and you've rehearsed the suppression of your anger long enough, then this might turn into signal tension. It's like you completely skip the awareness of your own anger and go straight into some sort of muscular tension. Usually it's some sort of a muscular tension. Um, it can show itself as chest tightness, clenched jaw, or tension headaches. Those are just examples. But you really, the signal tension could be anywhere. It could be anything. Could be in your back. Could be in your thighs. Could be anything. It's really only limited by your own imagination. Most commonly, though, the signal tensions do occur in the upper portion, so beginning in the stomach area and ending in your head. So somewhere up there. Rarely, it's more rare that it's in the like thighs or legs, but it can show up there too. Okay, so here's a nice little way of representing what I'm just talking about. So at the bottom of this triangle, you see true feeling. That's a true feeling that comes up for you. The next step, if we're trying to resist it, is signal anxiety. So when we have signal anxiety, we are actually aware of that feeling most often. We're aware that there is some feeling, but we're also resisting it, and which turns into anxiety because the resistance or the reason why we're resisting it is because we're afraid of it, so we feel anxiety. And then at the very end of the spectrum, we have signal tension. So that's when we lose touch. Most often, we lose touch with the underlying feeling, and instead, it's simply expressed through a physical symptom. So that could be, for example, tension headaches. So a lot of times, signal anxiety and signal tension become self-feeding. Now, part of the reason for why we develop signal anxiety and signal tension is that they are very effective at distracting us from the thing that we find threatening. So if anger is threatening, the anxiety that pops up for us is more acceptable, right? And it's an effective thing to focus on as opposed to the feeling that's underlying this anxiety. And same thing with signal tension. It's more effective. It's very effective at distracting us from the initial feeling that we find threatening. So, the headache is really annoying. So, some of the statements that we might say to ourselves is, "Oh man, I'm anxious again. Oh man, here's a headache again. I hate it." As opposed to statements that address the feeling directly, such as, "He's so annoying," or "That made me sad," right? So, we tend to go with the statements that are in red than the ones that are in green. Um, we end up being focused more on the the distraction, which is the signal anxiety or signal tension, than the actual cause. So, because we end up being focused more on the distraction, our annoyance with the distraction ends up refeeding the cycle. It ends up creating a cycle. So, for example, people can here's an example. Let's say you're afraid of anger, you're trying to suppress it, and your thing is you develop tension headaches. So somebody pisses you off, you find that unacceptable, you develop a tension headache. Your anger towards that person fades, but your tension headache is now annoying the hell out of you. And now you're gaining frustration from your tension headache. So you'll be making comments to yourself, "Oh man, here's the headache again. I hate it," right? As you make that comment to yourself, you are creating more tension. But because you find frustration and anger unacceptable, you're refeeding that tension, right? So that's an example of how that can exist. Same thing with anxiety. What can happen is you could have signal anxiety. So you feel anger at first, but then you feel signal anxiety because you're trying to suppress that anger, and you end up focusing more on anxiety. It's like, "Oh man, this anxiety is so annoying. I always have it. I can't deal with this, man." That statement represents your frustration with the anxiety, your singular focus on the anxiety, which then creates more anxiety over having anxiety, which now starts maintaining your chest tightness or just your general anxiety that you're having that is being used to distract you from the underlying feeling. And this anxiety can follow you around um, long past you having those original feelings, like anger, for example. Those feelings could have been long gone, but you'll still be stuck in that cycle of elevated anxiety over having anxiety. In other words, this is unnecessary stress. That's what I'm trying to get at. This is unnecessary stress. You don't need it. You could just experience the original feeling, contain it, right? So if it's anger, avoid lashing out, just contain it. That's the word we use in therapy. Containing the emotion and move on with your day, right? The anger will fade, the sadness will fade, everything fades. It's only temporary. But if we use the signal anxiety, if we're using the signal anxiety and signal tension, we can drag it out for days. So so yeah, by removing the belief that these feelings, their underlying feelings, or the symptoms that we get to help us distract ourselves from those feelings are threats to us. If we stop thinking of them as threats, we can remove an unnecessary layer of stress and anxiety that we experience on a daily basis. So how do we do that? How do we reduce our own resistance to experience? We can do that by focusing on our bodies. Our bodies contain a lot of information. Whenever you have a feeling, it's reflected in the body. Um, it's linked. There is no more question that our minds and bodies are linked, and it's like a mirror. So by focusing on your body, adopting a non-judgmental mindset, that's very important, and exploring these sensations with as much curiosity as possible, that's going to so the curiosity part, the exploration of it, that's going to increase your familiarity with how you experience either your signal anxiety or your signal tension. As a result, increased familiarity, I said that funny, familiarity, my lord, decreases resistance. It decreases our, kind of like, it's like decreasing stranger danger, right? When you first meet a stranger, if you're not familiar with them, you have your guard up. Same thing here, but when you increase your familiarity with the stranger, they're no longer a stranger, you decrease your guard. You drop your guard a little bit. Same thing here, you increase familiarity, and as a result, you decrease your resistance to the thing. After you've explored it to a certain degree, right? I'll give you examples in a second, like very specific examples. We'll run through a very generic demonstration of how this works. Once we've explored it, then we're going to do an experiment which is aimed to give the thing that we're observing total freedom. Giving it total freedom is essentially removing your remaining resistance to it. Oftentimes, people experience, as a result of that final move, when the final step is put in place, that experiment that I just mentioned, oftentimes people find that something changes, something shifts in their experience of their signal tension or signal anxiety. It oftentimes decreases, or sometimes even goes away completely. So let's do a generic demonstration of what I'm talking about. All right, so I imagine that you're probably sitting or laying down. It doesn't matter. Whatever you're doing, however you're listening to this video, become mindful of your current position. So I'm gonna, you know what, for sake of simplicity, sit down so that I can imagine you sitting down and I can operate as though you're sitting down. So do me a favor and take a moment to sit down. And I was gonna say, let me know when you sit down, but then I realized, wait, I'm recording a video. All right, so I'm gonna assume that you've sat down already. I want you to start noticing what it's like to be sitting in your chair. Notice the weight distribution of your feet on the ground. I'm assuming your feet are planted on the ground. If they're not, then just plant them on the ground just to keep this demonstration as simple as possible. Normally, what I would do, I would adjust to whatever your position you're in. So like the instructions I would give you would fit your current position. But because I don't know, I can't see you right now. I have no idea what kind of positions you're taking and what you're doing. So we're going to have to modify this a little bit. So just plant yourself evenly and plant your feet evenly and notice the weight distribution. Notice if there's a difference. Is your left foot, is that experiencing more pressure or less pressure than your right foot? And as you're doing this, keep in mind that you are like a detective. You're not trying to change anything. So if you notice feeling something in your leg, you're not going to try to move the leg. We can later. We can do it later, but for now, because we're in the exploratory stage, we're trying to learn exactly what it is that you're feeling and how you're feeling it. We're trying to learn about your natural experience of the present moment. Because we're doing that, we're more like detectives, right? So, or like biologists studying an animal out there in the wild. We're not trying to interfere, so we're looking from far away through our binoculars and just observing. So remember that that is your stance as you're doing this. So notice the way your feet feel now. Move up a little bit. If you felt something, make note of it. Um, what I'm going to do is to shorten this demonstration is I'm going to skip the sections of the body that typically don't contain as much action, and I'm going to move towards the section of the body that tends to, for most people, have more things going on. But I'm going to very quickly kind of run you through the sections that we would normally go through. So we started with our feet. Then I want you to notice your ankles. Notice your calves. Notice your knees. Now notice your thighs. Make note of anything that stands out. Maybe it's a tension, maybe it's pulling, pushing, squeezing, tingling. Make notice, make note of everything, and save that in your notepad, so to speak, or your mental, notes for later. So this is the part that I'm speeding through, the lower body. Now we're going to now we're going to start looking at the upper body, which is where most of the action takes place for most people, just to save time. Normally I would go through the whole thing. Okay, so now let's focus on your stomach. Now, normally I would have you go section by section, and if you tell me that there's something there, we would pause and explore it. But since I can't, we're not sitting face to face and I can't communicate with you, we're going to have to explore everything at once, and then I'm going to ask you to just make notes of where you felt something most pronounced, something that stands out for you. So check your stomach, look for any sensations, tingling, squeezing, pulling, pushing. Check with your chest. Is there any tension there? Is there squeezing, pushing, pulling? Your shoulders. Check with your arms. Check where your biceps are, then check with your forearms, check with your hands, both hands. Check with your neck. Check the front of your neck. Check the back of your neck. Now look at your face. Check in with your face. Is there something going on there? What about the back of your head? What about the top of your head? So I'm going to give you maybe 30 more seconds to rescan all those sections that I just told you about. So again, check with your stomach, check with your back. I completely forgot to mention that. Check with your back also, your lower back, your mid back, your upper back. Check with your chest, check with your shoulders, check with your neck, the back of the neck, the front of your neck, your face, your forehead, your cheeks, your lips, your nose, your eyes, the sides of your head, the top of your head. Check all those sections. Just scan them. And make note of any sensation that you might be aware of. So I'm going to assume most people can usually pick up on something. There's usually something going on at any given time. I'm going to assume that you've noticed some stuff. What I'm going to ask you to do is to pick the thing that, let's call it, is the loudest. What is calling your attention the most out of all the things that you might have noticed? What is calling your attention the most? I want you to zone in on that. And now we're going to really explore that sensation. The first thing I want you to do is to try to map out, trace the perimeter of that sensation. If you could visualize where the sensation starts, where it ends, do that. First, you might want to start with a 2D map of it. So if, let's say, you feel something in your chest, try to draw a perimeter. Where do you first feel that thing in your chest? Go from shoulder to shoulder, or from up to bottom, from top to bottom. So from left to right, where does it start? Where does it end? From top to bottom, where does it start? Where does it end? Does it have like a shape to it? Can you define the shape even better? Can you narrow it down? Try to do that. Next, what I want you to do is see if there's depth to it. So we know left to right, top to bottom. What about depth? How deep does it go? We're trying to go almost three-dimensional. No, we're going three-dimensional. Can you create some kind of a three-dimensional representation of that sensation? I'm going to give you just a couple of seconds to try to work on that. All right, so now we hopefully have that. Now I want to ask you if that sensation does that sensation have a texture to it? If you were to envision this sensation, would it have a texture? Does a texture make sense to apply? Maybe it's jagged, maybe it's ribbed, maybe it's smooth, maybe it's kind of airy. If there is, just be aware that okay, yeah, it does have a texture. Or if a texture doesn't seem to make sense, that's okay. What about a color? Does it have a color? Try on a couple of different colors. Does red fit? Does yellow fit? Does blue fit? Does green fit? Is some kind of white or a mixture of white and yellow and blue? It does check out different color combinations, check out different colors, see if something fits. We're trying to narrow down, we're trying to define that sensation as much as possible. Now, see if that sensation is doing anything. Is it pushing? Is it pulling? Is it squeezing? What is it doing? Is it pulsing? Are you noticing that sensation pulse in any way? Does it seem to have a pattern? Just notice that. It's okay if it doesn't, so if like it didn't have a color or it wasn't really doing anything, that's okay. But see, check it out, explore it. Okay, so I think now we have it pretty well defined. We can check one more thing. We can check if it maybe makes a sound. Is there a sound that comes to mind when you're observing that sensation? That's rare, but sometimes people can come up with a sound that seems to really fit that sensation. There are no wrong answers here, by the way. It's just How truthful does that seem to you? How good of a match of a description does it seem to you? All right, so now what I'm going to ask you to do is, with all of those little exploratory things you've done, the color, the shape, the texture, the sound, maybe even density. Density could be a good thing that you could look at. Does this seem to have a density? With your observation of any patterns of pulsing, um, I want you to just stay focused on it. Just observe the dance that it does. If it is doing a dance, observe that. Notice if anything's changing. Notice if it's moving. Is it staying the same? Is the intensity varying from time to time? Just observe it for about a minute. I'll give you a minute. Still here. Just want to give you a little bit more time just to get a little more familiar with this sensation that you're experiencing. All right. So stay focused on it. Keep your attention on it at all times. Continue to observe it. But now we're going to try an experiment. I'm curious, and I hope you're curious too. What would happen if you gave it total freedom to do whatever it wants to do? If it wants to get bigger, let it get bigger. If it wants to get smaller, let it get smaller. If it wants to move to a different part of your body, let it move to a different part of your body. If it wants to spread everywhere, all over your body and just take over, give it the freedom to do so. I want you to try that and observe. I'll give you another minute or two to observe it. Don't worry about the time. I'm keeping track of time. It's been about 47 seconds. Just stay focused and observe for any changes. If you're noticing any changes, just track those changes. Follow them around wherever they might go. If it got bigger, observe where did it go. If it got smaller, try to follow it almost like with a magnifying lens, trying to capture the details, as many details as possible. All right, so let's pause right here. So let's come out of this little exercise now. And so what happened? I'm curious what happened to you. I wish I I wish I could get your feedback, um, but I can't since this is a video. But for a lot of people, if they were experiencing tensions or tension headaches or something like that, they will likely have experienced a decrease. If they were able to remove resistances by increasing familiarity with the symptoms, and then second, by engaging in that experiment, that experiment at the very end, if everything went to plan, then all odds are that the symptoms have decreased. It is possible for the symptoms to change. It's possible that the symptoms actually did get worse. In which case, my number one suspicion is that instead of removing the resistances, we accidentally increased the resistance to that symptom. Perhaps the person has such a high fear of the bodily sensation that they were experiencing that instead of letting go, they actually built up their resistances and it caused an increase in the uncomfortable symptom. If that was the case, what I would do is I would continue to explore it. I would keep staying with exactly what you're experiencing and repeat the process again. So if you noticed an increase in symptoms, like it worsening, right? You feel more uncomfortable now, then repeat the whole process. Again, study the worst symptoms, study them again in great detail, unpack them to a great extent. The color, the sight, the sound, smell, maybe even, unpack it like we did in the beginning, and try the experiment again. The next time around, after it gets worse, you'll realize eventually, sooner or later, you'll realize that this is not as bad as you thought it was. You increase your familiarity with it and decrease your resistance to it, and the next experiment should succeed. If not, the third one will. This process sooner or later succeeds, is what I'm trying to get at. So if you are part of the group that for whom this got worse, that's what you should do. If nothing changed, perhaps you weren't observing a bodily phenomenon that was an actual resistance. It doesn't have to. You might be resisting an experience in one moment, but not resisting an experience in the next. So perhaps at this particular moment, as you were doing this exercise, and if nothing happened, then you perhaps weren't observing a symptom of your own resistances to experience. That's fine. So that's that. That concludes the generic demonstration. Now, okay, so let's talk about a specific application. Application for tension headaches. What would that look like? I'm gonna try to speed read through it because I just gave you a generic demonstration. That's if we didn't know what was going on. That's if we had to explore everything from scratch. But with a tension headache, we know already where it's at, so we can jump right into it. So just like in the demonstration I gave, first we gotta establish the right mindset, right? So you're a detective or a biologist observing a wild animal. You're not interfering. You're not changing anything. You're just studying. So this is a script that you can follow yourself if you'd like to do this yourself, or if you have a buddy that you want to do this with. Some people prefer, or for some people it's more effective if someone else is doing this for them. Sort of like a difference between self-hypnosis and going to a hypnotist. You could technically self-hypnotize, or you could have a hypnotist hypnotize you. It depends on what your preferences are. But you can very well do this yourself. All right, so after you establish the right mindset, same stuff as we did before, as we did in the generic example. You're going to get to know it better. So the next handful of statements are all about getting to know it better. So first we're talking about the perimeter that we did in the example. Then we're talking about, oh, actually this one I missed in my generic example. Then we can look at the variance in intensity within that perimeter. So once you draw a perimeter around a sensation, if you look at just the left side versus the right side, does one seem more intense on the left than on the right? You can also check the intensity on the top versus the bottom, and so on and so forth. Then we're looking at what it's doing. Is it pushing, pulling, squeezing, ripping? What is it doing? We're still getting to know it better. 5, 6, 7, it's all getting to know it better. What does it look like? Does it have a color, a shape, like a depth, like 3D depth? Does it have a texture? Is there a sound associated with it? And then finally, we're putting it all together and we're just observing with everything that we have learned about it. We're observing it like a big picture kind of thing. And usually I'll have you do it for about a minute to 2 minutes, and I try to time you so you don't have to time yourself because the more you distract yourself from doing this, the more you break your connection to those feelings. And since they're already things that we're trying to resist, any disconnection from those things is just making the job harder. So we're trying to eliminate disconnects as much as possible. So if you're doing this on your own, my recommendation is maybe don't even bother timing yourself. Just try to do it long enough to get a good sense of what's going on. A good rule of thumb is that I always notice that people are very impatient with this. They try to rush it. So they'll feel like 2 minutes have passed, whereas only like 45 seconds have passed. So a good rule of thumb is to remind yourself that if you are already itching to move on to the next step, give yourself maybe 30 more seconds. All right, and then we're going to end it with removing the resistance to experience. How do we do that? With that experiment, the very last experiment that I did in the generic demonstration. So the difference between this and the generic demonstration is that this immediately starts at the symptom, whereas the generic demonstration scans your whole body. Or, well, we didn't scan the whole body because I didn't want to waste time on the legs, because oftentimes there's not much going on. Yes, some people, yes, there's stuff going on. I've seen people have things happening with their thighs, with their calves, but it's less often. It's less often that the really juicy stuff is happening down there. So we skipped that, but if you were doing a generic approach to it, like you were exploring something for the first time, you would include everything. Here, with tension headaches, we know where it's at. We know it's probably by the temples or the back of the head or something like that. So we do the same thing as in the generic. We end it the same way as in the generic demonstration. We do the experiment. We allow it to get as big as it wants to, and observe what happens. Well, I use all statements. I say allow it to get as big as it wants to, but also as small as it wants to. However, the thing that we resist the most is most likely it getting as big as it wants to. So, but I try to mask that so the expectations aren't certain. I find that this technique is more effective the less expectations a person has. So why are we doing what I just described? I think I'm gonna skip this because I think I pretty much explained it. But why did the script that I just read, or why is a generic demonstration that I gave you guys, why did we do what we did? So I did kind of go over this, but let me just quickly go over it again. The reason why we did what we did. So what did we do? First, we set up the right mindset, right? So the biologist, the detective, because we don't want you judging anything. We don't want you. We want you to be in as neutral of a stance as possible. Because if we judge things, then we're going to create new symptoms through judgment, which is it's not the end of the end of experiment, the end of this exercise. We can still use that, and we can actually switch tracks, and by following our own judgments and the consequences it creates in our bodies, and following those and unpacking those, that's entirely possible. But we're trying to keep this as clean of a technique as possible. So we're trying to enter this in a as least judgmental attitude as possible. Then what we're doing is we're exploring it in great detail. So a bunch of the next statements that I've made, or in the script or in the generic demonstration, were all about getting to know it. Color, shape, sound, action. Is it pushing, pushing? Is it pushing, pulling, squeezing? Things like that. This causes your familiarity with the thing that you tend to resist to increase, which in turn decreases your resistance to it. And finally, we ended with a big bang, the experiment that drops or removes our resistance to that sensation entirely. That's when we allow it to do whatever it wants to do. So that's why we did what we did, and that's why it works for many people. All right, so that's how we deal with signal tension. But what about signal anxiety? What you saw in the demonstration and then you read in the script, it's going to be the same thing with signal anxiety, except that in signal anxiety, instead of focusing on just one sensation, there's going to be at least two sensations. One sensation will represent the anxiety. The second sensation will be, it's going to be in there somewhere. We just have to find it. Is going to represent the underlying feeling. So in signal anxiety, the underlying feeling is oftentimes accessible, much more accessible to our awareness, to our conscious awareness, than it is in signal tension. So in signal anxiety, we'll zone in on the symptoms that represent the underlying feeling, and we'll do a little dance with it. You know, the more you focus on that feeling, sometimes you might experience your resistance going up, and then we'll track the resistance going up, and then it's going to fade away. Then we'll refocus again on the symptoms related to the feeling, and in that way, it's almost like we're stretching. It's like doing a stretch. We're stretching your ability to express, to experience the underlying feeling with this constant dance back and forth between the resistance and the symptoms that represent the feeling. So by stretching your ability, by increasing almost like a widening the hole through which your feeling can move through, we're able to minimize the signal anxiety because over time you become comfortable with experiencing that feeling, and we reduce your anxiety as a whole. Now, something I want to let you guys know is, from my experience, anger is the most common feeling underlying signal anxiety in a workplace. So anger, frustration, very common. Oh, okay, so now let's go to chest tightness example. So in this example, it's not quite, it follows the same philosophy, same idea that, this is a self-feeding cycle kind of a thing. But we're not going to be using this like focusing slash embodiment technique that we were doing a second ago, this mindfulness thing that we were doing a second ago. Here, we're just going to apply a strategy. Now, I'm going to describe this very briefly, but if you want a more lengthy description, there is a video I have on YouTube, on my YouTube channel. Just search my practice's name search YouTube for my practice name, and you'll find it. So the problem that I'm addressing here with this technique is chest tightness, that feeling that where you feel like you can't take a full breath. The intervention, I call it breathing within your bounds. So here, oftentimes when there's chest tightness, that's more of a signal tension than it is signal anxiety. Well, if it gets to this point, where it's like, day in, day out, you just can't seem to take a full breath. It's like there's a vice around your chest, and you can't inhale as much as you'd like to for that deep, satisfying breath, right? So people oftentimes find this very annoying, understandably. The problem is that it exists because we find it so annoying. It's a self-feeding mechanism. So what we have to do is figure out how to find it less annoying. That's the tricky part. And my suggestion to you, and a lot of people, if you go check out the YouTube channel, it seems like a lot of people are finding this very helpful. My suggestion to you is to stop fighting that tension. So when you're inhaling, right, when you take a deep breath, there is a point at which you start experiencing that rubber band effect where your muscles, where the tension is not allowing you to easily expand your chest. My tip to you is to only breathe as far as you don't experience the resistance. So that means taking shallower breaths. That might also mean that you might have to breathe a little bit faster. But the whole point is that you're finding a way to breathe comfortably. Sure, it's not as awesome as getting that awesome deep breath that you crave, but you're breathing comfortably within your bounds, within your limits, tension limits. The idea is that you no longer try to push past that resistance in your chest to try to expand your chest wider, because that's really the source of your frustration. That constant fight is your source of frustration. That constant fight to even get a yawn going. Yawning is oftentimes the most satisfying deep breath that we can get. So if you do this long enough, sooner or later you're going to interrupt the cycle of frustration and retensing that's causing your chest tightness. I really hope you guys found this helpful. Give it a shot because this really works. And just remember, after all is said and done, all you're really doing is learning not to give a blank about what is happening. And that is what's really the solution, is what's really is going to interrupt the chest tightness. All right, let's go on to the next one. The next one is dealing with stress versus coping with it. So, what's the most often, what kinds of advice, advices? Yeah, what kind of advice do you most often hear when it comes to dealing with stress or anxiety? It's usually stuff like take a walk, cool off. I guess that applies more to anger. Go watch a funny video. Do something fun. Go out with friends. Watch a movie. Right. This is all stuff that, in essence, is avoidance, and that's a problem for some. So I would say for most people do this to some degree, and most people to some degree carry stress with them on a daily basis that uh, is really the product of unaddressed concerns. Because we've been avoiding for so long, we haven't been tackling the concerns that come up for us. We end up just kind of dragging it behind us like a ball and chain. Another way of looking at anxiety is to say that it is the awareness of a risk minus the preparation for that risk. Let me say that again because this is really important. Another way of understanding anxiety is to say that anxiety is the awareness of a risk. You are aware that a risk exists minus the preparation for that risk, but you are not prepared. You don't have a plan of action to deal with that risk. A lot of times, because of the advice that we get, just a whole society seems to give us this advice to avoid, avoid, avoid. We assume that that is the easiest or best way to deal with stress, and it's almost like leads us down this path that, oh, it's just anxiety, like that's just like genetic. People like to put it in like that, almost like to remove ownership. A lot of times we'll say things like it's genetic, and we just blame it on genes and, well, we can't do anything about it, right? Where in fact we're just avoiding. We're just avoiding dealing with our anxiety. Our anxiety is trying to help us out. It's trying to tell us, hey, Bob, there is a potential problem down the line here. Just want you to take a look at that. But Bob is going, no, 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 don't want to hear about it. I'm going to go watch a movie, right? But the anxiety is still there. It's still your best buddy. It's kind of like telling you, like, Bob, yeah, remember that thing I mentioned? You might want to, no, 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 I don't want to hear about it, right? So that's how it kind of works out for a lot of us. But it's really trying to bring our attention to a potential problem that we might face or are facing even. So the point I'm trying to get across here, it's more of a reminder. It's a reminder to take the time to figure out exactly why you are stressing out and create a plan of action to address the underlying concern. If you do this, if you're guilty of avoiding a lot and you start changing how you deal with it, with your anxiety, and you start actually unpacking the reasons for why you're anxious and then coming up with plans to address your anxiety, you're going to find that most of your anxieties can be addressed within a day, and then you're done. You're done with that anxious feeling forever. That concern is no longer a concern because you've planned for it. Maybe you need to do some research. You might have to get online to figure out the details of everything. But that can take you a little bit of time. But within a day, I can imagine that most issues you'll be able to address. Now, how do you figure out if this is a problem for you? One shortcut to do that is if you fairly consistently find yourself not sure why you're being anxious. Why are you feeling anxious? Why am I stressing? I don't get it. Why the hell am I stressing? Right? If that's you, then that's probably what you're doing. You're probably a big avoider. You're probably avoiding a lot. Now, it doesn't mean that you always do that, but whenever you find yourself not sure of why you're feeling stressed out or anxious, that's a sign that that's what's happening for you, that you've avoided it or you haven't taken the time to figure it out yet. And you need to do that. So avoidance, by the way, is also something that frequently shows up with people who have generalized anxiety disorder. So avoidance is a big source of anxiety for a lot of people, is what I'm trying to get at. Um, Now, some people do struggle with figuring out what's bothering them. If you struggle with figuring out what's bugging you, you might benefit from this book. It's called Focusing, and it's by Eugene T. Gendlin. So you might want to look into that. It's basically what you do to try to figure stuff out. Like right now, if I ask you to start guessing and try to start figuring it out, what you're going to be doing is probably going to be very similar to what he describes. It's a natural process that we all engage in. It's just that he spells it out for you, and it can be helpful in filling in any blanks where you might be missing something. You know, he might give you like little ideas on how to narrow down what is really bothering you. It's actually not too different from the demonstration that I gave you guys earlier. The generic demonstration, like taking guesses. You know, guess is it like this? Is it like that? Is and listening to your own body and mind for its truth value. Does this feel more true than the other? Right. So you guess. Is it because Bob said that to me and now I'm worried, or is it because I saw that thing on the internet that talked about health problems, and you start guessing, right? And then you start comparing. Does this feel more true, or does that feel more true? And you follow the one that feels more true, right? That's basically the process in a nutshell. But you might find that book is very helpful. It's actually a really great concept, so I do recommend that book. All right, let's go on to the fourth thing: the constant worry tips. So these are some things that I've heard from my clients that have been that that that, that have been most helpful. Well, these are the things that most often pop up. Most often people mention to me that they've tried before and they found them helpful. So scheduling worry time. That people are telling me that helps them. I personally, I don't know, for some reason it doesn't click with me, but it seems to click with a lot of other people, so I'm mentioning it. Um, So this is the idea where you pick an hour in the day where you'll be worrying. So you get off work at 5. Maybe you decide that when I get home at 6 o'clock, I'm going to have a 6 to 7 worry session. This seems to help people not mull over the things that typically they ruminate on throughout the day. And oftentimes they end up forgetting what they were worried about by the time the worry hour comes around. Now, this is something that I do use. I guess it's like a version of the scheduling worry time thing. The writing down of ideas. So, uh, personally, I'm notorious for coming up with all kinds of ideas when it's time to sleep. So, like if I'm working on a project, and it's a creative kind of a project, I very commonly will lay down to sleep, and as soon as I lay down, I start coming up with, oh, I could do that, I could do that, I could do that, and I really don't want to lose those ideas. And so my impulse is to get back up and start working on my project, but it's sleep time, right? So what's my solution? My solution is to have a notepad right by my bed, and I write down those ideas. The same thing applies to worries. Let's say you have a stressful period of time and you're trying to sleep, right? But you have all kinds of new threats or new possible concerns that are popping up for you, or maybe possible solutions to those concerns that you've been dealing with recently. Write them down. Write them down real quick. Save them for tomorrow. And as soon as you get up tomorrow, you can start tackling them. I found this very helpful, and I think a lot of you will as well. Something else I was going to mention, I forgot about that. Well, it's gone. So let's move on to the next one. And the last one for the constant warriors: do cardio. Like this is going back to the beginning of this presentation. You got to remember, remind yourself of the stress response and resolution cycle. If you have a desk kind of a job, and you're not on a regular basis moving giant boxes to the point where you're breaking a sweat, then you need to give your body that resolution part of the stress response cycle. So just 20 minutes of intense cardio session within the 70 to 85% of max heart rate should be enough to interrupt most high levels of anxiety and stress. All right, so that close that. And last but not least, stress oftentimes affects our quality of sleep. So let's talk about insomnia. One of the simplest and most effective tricks that people can apply for any kind of problem with sleeping, which involves difficulty with falling asleep as well as difficulty with staying asleep. They're both related to the same stress, to the same kind of self-created stress. One trick, simple trick to do is to go to bed with paradoxical intent. What the hell is paradoxical intent? Paradoxical intent is okay. Well, let's talk about how do we typically go to bed. Typically, when we're going to bed with a goal. I am going to bed because I'm going to go to sleep. My goal with bedtime is to fall asleep. That's my goal. And that becomes the problem because we're so gung ho, some of us will get so gung ho about getting to bed and falling asleep that we end up getting frustrated if sleep doesn't come. For those who frequently wake up in the night, the fear, the worry about waking up in the night, breaking the sleep, right? Breaking your sleep, ruining your sleep, is such a concern that you end up waking up at night. It's just, it's running. The concern is running in the back of your mind, constantly saying, "Oh my God, I hope I don't wake up. Oh my God, I hope I don't wake up." And boom, you wake up. So the trick here is to get comfortable with the idea of bedtime not being for sleep, but for relaxation. So you have to convince yourself that it's good enough to just rest, to just relax in bed, not sleep. Your goal isn't sleep, it's just to relax. And I have a good argument for that. My argument for why it's good enough to just relax is that I think most people will find it hard to argue with the idea that if you're just relaxing in bed is more restful than laying in bed and stressing over not sleeping. Right? I think most of us would agree, on some level at least, that you'll get more rest just by laying there and relaxing, listening to some calming music or something. Enjoying the way the bed feels, the comfort of the bed. I really like to sleep in like sub-zero temperatures. I really like the how comfortable it feels when I'm under the covers and it's freezing cold out there. I love that. Like that to me is awesome. So maybe that could be your thing. Find something about bedtime that's just soothing and relaxing, and that you can just relax with. That's the only goal. If you're doing that, you're succeeding. Remove the idea of sleep being your goal. When you do that, I think you'll find that for most of you, I looked up the stats on this. They did studies on this, and it was an overwhelming majority of individuals that I think it was like 80%. I don't quote me on this, but I think it was 80% of participants responded positively to paradoxical intent. That it means that their quality of sleep improved in one measure or another. So give that a go. Don't you may benefit from it right away on the first night, or it might take you a little bit of time to try to find the best kind of an attitude, a paradoxical intent attitude, um, to replace your previous attitude, which was, I'm going to bed to sleep. But once you do, maybe you might need a little bit of rehearsal, but eventually, I think this will help you. So, that concludes the presentation. Uh, so about us, we are a private practice providing individual counseling or psychotherapy for most problems, although we do particularly specialize in the treatment of panic and anxiety disorders. If you want to learn more about us, you can visit our website. It's ajbcounseling.com. If you need to contact us for any reason whatsoever, here's our phone. Our phone number is 347-460-6570, and we have an email address. You can email us also. That's info@ajbcounseling.com. I hope you found this useful. I really do. Leave your comments. Leave your comments in the comments section. If you have any questions, maybe you can, if you leave them in the comments, then or leave your questions, that might help me identify any kind of holes that I might have left in my presentation, and so I can address them in the future. I would really appreciate that. Um, do all the good YouTube stuff. So hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, share it with your colleagues, your friends. Actually, that's probably the most important thing at this point. If you could share this, that would be amazing. It would be really helpful with your boss, maybe. Uh, yeah. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.